belief not as marketing, not as motivation, but belief as this quiet force that determines what actually happens during the comprehensive exam. And, all year long, we have worked with doctors and their teams on this central idea that if you don't truly believe something matters, then it doesn't get prioritized during the comprehensive exam. And if you don't believe something changes outcomes, it doesn't get reinforced. And if a patient doesn't sense belief from the doctor, then they won't act. And that belief is what turns knowledge into behavior, and it's a good thing. But belief also can become a bad thing. It can cause us to fail. And that's what I want to talk about today, because belief can run ahead of evidence, and belief can become certainty before data supports that certainty. And when that happens in healthcare, especially in certain patient populations, it creates risk. And so the FDA decision on low-dose atropine gives us a rare opportunity to examine that tension in real time. This isn't to attack myopia management. It's not to dismiss atropine. It's not to defend regulators. I mean, if you've listened to me talk, I'm highly skeptical of regulators, but it's really to ask a harder question. When does belief help us act? And when does belief quietly replace analysis? So, hello and welcome to the Chris Wolfe Podcast on iCode Media. Today, I want to talk about, I really want to end the year as our last episode of 2025. And it's been a fun ride. We started in 2019. We're going to continue into 2026. But thanks so much, everybody, for listening, for taking the time to give us your feedback, to ask for different audience members or different interviews. In 2025, I spent a lot of time talking about belief and belief that transitions into action at the comprehensive exam. And I'm going to start there, but I'm also going to talk today about where belief can take us maybe in the wrong direction. If you've noticed, at the back half of 2025, I've done a ton of monologues. That's not my intent. That's not why I started the podcast originally. I did want to have a lot of conversations, but my travel schedule really got away from me, and we had a lot of travel where it made scheduling interviews much more challenging. So I'm hoping to remedy that in 2026, where my travel becomes more intentional again, and we can actually have conversations on this podcast channel. So look forward to that. But today I wanted to end the year talking about belief, because it's so much of what we've done. Belief not as marketing, not as motivation, but belief as this quiet force that determines what actually happens during the comprehensive exam. And, all year long, we have worked with doctors and their teams on this central idea that if you don't truly believe something matters, then it doesn't get prioritized during the comprehensive exam. And if you don't believe something changes outcomes, it doesn't get reinforced. And if a patient doesn't sense belief from the doctor, then they won't act. And that belief is what turns knowledge into behavior, and it's a good thing. But belief also can become a bad thing. It can cause us to fail. And that's what I want to talk about today, because belief can run ahead of evidence, and belief can become certainty before data supports that certainty. And when that happens in healthcare, especially in certain patient populations, it creates risk. And so the FDA decision on low-dose atropine gives us a rare opportunity to examine that tension in real time. This isn't to attack myopia management. It's not to dismiss atropine. It's not to defend regulators. I mean, if you've listened to me talk, I'm highly skeptical of regulators, but it's really to ask a harder question. When does belief help us act? And when does belief quietly replace analysis? So please enjoy this monologue. As always, be sure to subscribe to the podcast, write a review, share it with your friends, and support those who support us. The most common questions I get include, what ophthalmological codes or evaluation and management codes should I use? What ICD-10 codes do I need to bill with this CPT code? What CPT codes can be billed together and what can't? And my favorite, How do I manage a patient who has diabetes who comes in for a quote-unquote routine eye exam? These questions really highlight the confusion and uncertainty that serves as a daunting hurdle for providers, makes it more challenging for them to care for their patients and provide those patients with the best opportunity for a lifetime of ocular health and clear vision. That's why we built iCode Education, for this specific purpose. Our mission is to provide optometrists with resources to help you understand disease states, revenue cycles, and billing and coding so that you can put that on autopilot and truly care for your patients. Check out iCodeEducation.com. That's EYECODE education.com. We've developed a premier billing and coding bundle that includes all of our billing and coding resources in one place. We also have a 10% discount code just for listeners of this podcast. Enter the coupon code EYECODEMEDIA22 at checkout. We'd love to work with you. Check out iCodeEducation.com. Hello, dedicated optometrists. Are you looking for a way to support your patient's vision and overall eye health? Let me introduce you to Vision Edge Pro, a visual performance supplement that stands out in our profession. Vision Edge Pro contains a balanced blend of mesozeaxanthine, lutein, and zeaxanthine in a 10-10-2 ratio. This combination has been scientifically shown to increase macular pigment density, which enhances visual performance, including contrast sensitivity and vision in glare situations. Additionally, Vision Edge Pro provides 300 milligrams of DHA and EPA, fulfilling the daily requirements for omega-3s as recognized by the leading health organizations. This ensures your patients receive the essential nutrients their eyes need for optimal health. Whether it's for everyday screen use, night driving, or enjoying the outdoors, Vision Edge Pro supports your patients in seeing their best. Recommend Vision Edge Pro for your patients today and help them achieve clearer, healthier vision. Contact your local MacuHealth representative for more details. Vision Edge Pro, because your patients deserve the best in eye health. Go to MacuHealth.com and use the coupon code PODCAST2024 at checkout for special discounts. Okay, so I want to be clear at the outset. The controversy in myopia management is not whether intervention can help some children. There's broad agreement that I've seen that myopia progression matters, that early identification matters, and that some interventions slow progression in some patients. That's kind of nuanced, actually. But that debate is largely settled. The real controversy today is something else. It's this degree of confidence with which we sometimes assert that a specific level of treatment works, even when the evidence is nuanced, it's incomplete, or highly dependent on patient selection and endpoint definition. And this tension isn't between believers and skeptics. It's between probability and certainty. And that tension shows up clearly when belief becomes detached from the actual structure of the data. And so that's what I want to dive into. First, what a lot of us are reacting to, most clinicians in any case, is this FDA decision, but not so much their decision because we don't have access to that, but it's the professional organization statements. It's the manufacturer's press releases. It's conference commentary. It's expert opinion. And what most of us don't have as clinicians is a full peer-reviewed manuscript. The FDA's internal analysis is absent so far. Detailed subgroup tables are absent. Sensitivity analysis is absent. And so at present, the most concrete and publicly available data that we have is a scientific poster from the STAR trial. And I will link to this. I'm going to do a blog post that talks about a lot of this stuff as well. And I'll link to the poster so you all can view it as you like. But they're useful. Posters are useful, but they're still not definitive. So this analysis could even be flawed. It could be worse than my analysis is going to be. It could be better than what my analysis could be, actually more positive, that would support a lot of the commentary that we're seeing. But we don't know. All we have at best, what we have is the poster. So, posters are flawed because they compress methodology. They emphasize select outcomes. They are necessarily going to admit nuance in the discussion. And yet this certainty has arrived very quickly. And that's the first signal to me that belief may be doing more work than the data is doing. And so Let's look at what the FDA actually said. Let's anchor ourselves in something that's factual. And in its press release describing the complete response letter, Signexis stated that the FDA acknowledged the complete response letter, that the study met its primary efficacy endpoint, but stated that in its view that the data do not support the effectiveness of low-dose atropine in children with myopia. No deficiencies were related to safety or product quality, end quote. And that sentence matters. The FDA did not say that the study failed. They didn't say that the drug was unsafe, and they didn't say that the manufacturing was flawed. The FDA said something that was much more uncomfortable. The endpoint was met, but the totality of the data did not support effectiveness. And that's a statement that's about things like effect size or robustness or consistency. It's about generalizations that can be made. So it's not about intent. It's not about access. It's not about belief. And so what we have seen in the professional statements that have been communicated based on this is this kind of contrast in professional messaging that doesn't meet what the FDA, based on the company who put this through trial, had said that the FDA has said, which is things like the AAOMC, who have said, quote, low-dose atropine has been showed to slow the worsening of nearsightedness safely and effectively, and we hope to see an approved option available in the United States soon. AAPOS commentary emphasized the implications of non-approval and the importance of access. And those positions, they're understandable. They're also advocacy statements. And I want you to notice the difference in the language. Shown to slow safely and effectively communicates certainty, while the data do not support effectiveness creates hesitation. Both statements reference the same underlying trial, and that divergence is exactly where belief and evidence begin to separate. And if you really dive into a lot of these journal articles or publications that are evaluating this, these op-eds, editorials, they will start by being sort of beside themselves as a non-approval, and then they'll go into basically myopia as a epidemic. By 2050, there's going to be this many patients that have this much myopia, et cetera, et cetera. But they don't go into actually the data. That's where I want to dive into what the STAR poster actually shows. Let's talk about the poster itself, and then we can decide whether or not there is a flaw. What did the FDA actually see? And so this STAR trial enrolled, over 800 children across 3 arms. And the primary endpoint emphasized a refractive threshold of progression worse than minus 75 diopters or 0.75 diopters at 36 months. The mean annual progression difference for 0.01% atropine versus vehicle was approximately 0.08 diopters per year. 0.08 diopters per year. And while it might be statistically significant, it's also quite modest. CooperVision and the AOA have joined forces in a groundbreaking initiative to transform how optometrists treat children with myopia. The Myopia Collective aims to unite our profession and its allies to challenge the status quo and elevate the standard of care for children with myopia. Everyone is invited to become a member of the collective. By joining, you pledge to act in slowing childhood myopia progression. Membership includes regular updates and information about the collective's efforts, access to educational opportunities and resources, and insights from the ambassador optometrists who advocate for community policy and changes supporting the collective's mission. Click the link in the show notes to join the collective today. If you're ready to stop feeling overwhelmed and start running a safer, more profitable practice, here's the next step. First, book a strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners. We'll uncover the biggest risks and opportunities in your practice. Then, choose the package that fits your goals. From there, we'll get you launched with confidence, with clear systems, with expert support, and with peace of mind, knowing your practice is protected and set up to grow. Don't wait until something goes wrong. Book your strategy call with us, Practice Performance Partners, today. And when effect sizes are modest, interpretation becomes fragile. And then if you look at like the subgroup forest plot on this paper, several clinically relevant subgroups show confidence intervals that cross zero. Things like, subgroups like older children, certain racial groups, higher baseline myopia ranges, lighter irides. This doesn't prove that there's no effect, but it does demonstrate uncertainty, and that uncertainty matters when you're asking regulators to label a therapy for broad pediatric use. I mean, we should care about that. We should acknowledge it. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, we'll get into some other things here as well. I mean, Kyle Clutie did a Optometry Simplified newsletter last week that I think becomes essential reading. Kyle examined myopia control through the lens of what's known as number needed to treat. And I'm not going to reproduce his calculations here. You should read his full analysis directly, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But what Kyle does exceptionally well is remind us that statistical significance is not the same as clinical impact, and that average benefit matters when therapy is long-term, and that belief should scale with size effect. And, one example, and again, there are other interventions like MiSight, like Stellus, that show a large separation between treated and controlled eyes. And the STAR data for 0.01% atropine showed a smaller separation. And while those endpoints differ and the populations differ, the contrast is still informative. Belief should not be binary when effect size is continuous. And so, this response to this regulation or regulatory uncertainty is interesting. One of the things that I think is a quiet signal within the STAR data that I haven't seen anybody talk about yet is that the higher dose didn't clearly outperform the lower dose in the data that we've seen in the poster. I mean, we've got lots of evidence that show that 0.05% atropine would be a stronger dose based on ATOM 1 and ATOM 2 at the LAMP study data. And I still think, why did the manufacturer choose such a low dose is kind of beyond me. But there are legitimate reasons that a higher dose could lead to a lower response. It could be because of adherence differences, nonlinear biology, outcomes where endpoint insensitivity, populations that are heterogeneous. But from a regulatory perspective, a loss of a clear dose response does increase the uncertainty, especially when it flies in the face of the other formulations and concentrations that we've seen. And certainly it could be that maybe you're getting a higher dose because you have better penetration, and that higher dose actually does connotate a negative dose response curve. But it does fly in the face of all the other studies that we've seen where the higher the dose, the more strong the impact. And so it's one of the, in my opinion, dose response is one of the strongest signals that an effect is real and it's robust. And when that is inconsistent, our belief about whether this works or doesn't can't fill in the gap. We have to look to the evidence to fill in the gap. So, what does this mean for us clinically, this whole, analysis? It doesn't mean that we should abandon atropine, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that we should ignore myopia management. It doesn't mean that we should wait for perfect data, but it does mean we should calibrate our belief systems. We should assess things like baseline risk really carefully, and we should match intervention strength to progression rate. We should monitor responses. We should adjust those interventions when we need to, and we should communicate in probabilities and not in promises. And and belief should motivate action, and evidence should guide expectation. And I also think there's this other idea of access that I think we should explore before we get into sort of the closing. Is I'm not convinced that let me say it this way. we shouldn't be convinced that simply because something is approved by the FDA, that it will actually lead to a lowering of cost or an increase in accessibility of a treatment. Right now we have compounded atropine doses that are widely available, and they're relatively cost effective. And we've seen it just recently in the last couple of years within dry eye that we had the same within topical cyclosporins that were readily available. They were not FDA approved, but in a pinch, we could, if a patient had too high of costs on insurance, or branded medications weren't covered, we had the ability to go to a compounded option. Now we don't have that ability anymore. And so we should be concerned, or at least potentially concerned, or at least we should at least understand, maybe not concerned, but we should understand that just because we have something that's FDA approved doesn't increase accessibility. As I shared, our dry eye option with cyclosporin actually made accessibility less likely for non-covered options. That is a problem now that we didn't have to overcome. We had a solution for. We don't have that solution anymore. And so, I just think we need to be aware of that. Just because we have FDA approval of something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to increase accessibility. And, especially when we have something else that's the same compound available. I know that, we can talk about vehicle, we can talk about stability, et cetera, but for practical purposes, really where you're thinking about FDA approval is sort of where it can lead to access directly is when you have no other compound that's available, especially the same compound. And then this is a novel compound. Atropine isn't novel. We have it in multiple doses now, and we can get it compounded relatively easily. And it would be different if this was some entirely novel compound, which this isn't. So I want to end by where I began, and that's that belief does do enormous good in myopia management. A lot of the people that I know well that are very committed to myopia management have a very deeply held belief that they are doing the right thing. And I think that's great. It moves care forward. But belief without humility can drift into certainty before the data are ready. And the FDA decision on low-dose atropine is not a referendum on myopia control, in my opinion. It's a reminder that evidence, interpretation, and urgency do not move at the same speed. And as we head into next year, my hope is that not that we believe less, it's that we believe more carefully. Because belief aligns with evidence, then patients win. And if belief runs ahead of data, then it's our responsibility to take a step back, reevaluate what we believe and why we believe it, and not simply push forward that something ought to be approved when it may not be that way. Bottom line, I think we have, the good news is we have great options that are cost effective, that have a lot of evidence behind them related to atropine. And whether the FDA thinks that this compound is approvable or not, we still have those options for our patients. So I hope this episode was helpful. I'd love to have conversations with people that would take a different side. So if you know anybody, please reach out to me. I'll have those conversations with them on the podcast, especially as I get into 2026 and have the expectation that I can have more interviews again. So in any case, I hope this was helpful. Have a great new year. Merry Christmas, and I'll see you on the next one.